Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly soft sandals only into the echoing corridors of an imperial Roman villa tucked into the soft, sun-warmed hills just outside the chaotic buzz of ancient Rome. The marble underfoot is cool and distant birdsong filters through a lattice of cypress trees. You pause by a fountain shaped like a startled sea god spitting water from his nose. Somewhere deeper inside the villa, a slightly off-key voice is belting out something that might be Greek, but could also just be a very ambitious yawn. That, my sleepy friend, is Emperor Nero. And yes, he's singing again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to post your location and local time in the comments. It's fun seeing where in the world we're all drifting off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at Nero's private villa, the Domus Transitoria, before the palace fire, before the madness, before the fiddles. This place hasn't yet become infamous. For now it's a decadent yet peaceful hideaway where purple curtains sway and slaves whisper instructions in languages neither of you understand. Your role. Something between a servant and a shadow. You've been attached to the court's musical affairs, which sounds more glamorous than it is. Mostly you fetch warm honey water and replace snapped lyre strings. But on this particular day, the marble halls are filled with a new kind of energy. Not the usual scheming or sword polishing. No, today is about art and a boy who wants to sing. The young Nero is perhaps 12, pale, dramatic, prone to spontaneous bursts of emotion and very, very earnest about his voice. You don't know it yet, but this boy's musical ambition will outlast entire legions. At the moment, he's shrieking his way through scales with the confidence of a rooster on caffeine. It's hard to say where the idea came from. Historians still argue whether Nero's obsession with music came from his mother, Agrippina's attempts to soften his image, or if it was just his natural flair for flair. Either way, a coach was summoned. That's where you come in, or sort of. You witness the preparations for this great musical mentorship. The courtyard is cleared of gossipy senators. The acoustics are tested by a squad of unfortunate flautists. A food taster tries 3 kinds of boiled fig water to soothe imperial vocal cords. And then, with the gravity of a general arriving for war, Terpnos enters. Terpnos is not what you expected. No dramatic toga flutters, no powdered beard. He's middle-aged, slightly hunched, with permanently furrowed brows and the haunted expression of a man who's been asked to do one too many private performances. You learn quickly that Terpnos is a master of the cithara, a large, beautifully carved string instrument that looks like a lyre but thinks it's better than one. He bows low, introduces himself with exactly the amount of deference required, and then gets right to work. Nero, of course, is delighted. The lesson begins with posture breathing and something called vocal presence. You're standing behind a curtain, holding a towel, and trying not to laugh as Terpnos gently corrects the emperor's diaphragm control. The note Terpnos murmurs should rise like mist, not crash like an ox cart. Nero nods gravely, then proceeds to crash like an ox cart anyway. Over the next few weeks, you become deeply familiar with the structure of a Roman voice lesson. It starts with a ritual sniff of spiced vinegar, a gargle of something that smells like garlic, and boiled thyme, and then, of course, scales. So many scales. At one point, Nero insists that all lessons happen with a small chorus of backup singers. That lasts until one of them accidentally sings better than he does. She disappears quietly by the next morning. Still, you can't help but admire the boy's enthusiasm. Nero practices constantly. He sings in the bath, he sings at dinner, he even sings during audiences with foreign diplomats. Once you catch him whispering lyrics to a statue of Apollo, asking for divine help with high notes. Apollo, notably remains silent. Turnos does his best. He teaches Nero ancient melodies from both Roman and Greek traditions. He corrects posture and tone with monk-like patience. He composes simple songs about noble deeds and good governance, none of which Nero has experienced firsthand, but which he performs with convincing sincerity. In quieter moments, Turpnos confides in you. The lad has spirit, he sighs, massaging his temples. But sometimes I think I'm teaching music to a thunderstorm. By now, you've learned the palace well. You know which halls carry sound best. You've discovered the secret to unlocking a stubborn cithara string. And you've even begun to understand Nero's musical taste. He likes drama, he likes flourishes. He once rewrote a lullaby to include 3 murders and a thunderclap. And through it all, you're there, quiet, watchful towel in hand. The music isn't always good, but it is relentless. One evening, as the sun sets behind a curtain of cypress, Nero stands on a small marble stage in the garden. It's a private recital, just you, Turpnos, and a row of strategically positioned rose bushes. He plays a song he's written himself. Something about a heroic dolphin. Is it good? Not really. Is it passionate? Absolutely. And somehow in the cooling air of twilight, as you clap politely, and Turpnos mutters a tired bravo, you get the distinct feeling that this isn't a phase. This boy, this emperor-in-waiting, will sing, whether the world wants him to or not. By the time Nero turns 14, the villa echoes constantly with music, or at least his version of it. You're used to it now, the early morning vocal warm-ups that sound like a goose learning Latin, the way he sings as he walks, sings as he eats, sings when he's angry, and then sings about being angry. You begin to wonder if there's a Latin word for musically possessed. But this isn't just any teenage phase. This is Nero, heir to the Roman Empire, and he's already declared he will not merely rule, but perform. You suspect the whole empire might become an audience he never asked permission from. It started innocently enough, a lyre, a tutor, and a boy with big lungs and bigger ambitions. But by now, Nero is requesting lessons from musicians across the empire. He insists on trying exotic instruments from Egypt, strange scales from Persia, and once, memorably, a goat-hide drum from Gaul, which he immediately names Thumper. Of course you're there for all of it. You help unpack the shipments. You restring imported lyres with suspiciously silky chords. You polish the instruments until they shine like mirrors, though it's mostly so Nero can admire his singing face mid-note. You watch him progress too. Slowly, sure, but sincerely. The boy does improve. He can now hold a note without cracking. He's figured out how to modulate his voice depending on the lyrics, though occasionally the tragic ballads still come out sounding like he stubbed his toe. And yet you can tell this is more than just skill building. This is Nero rewriting his destiny. Historians still argue whether this was his escape from politics or his ultimate power play conquering Rome, not with swords but with song. He studies the ancient myths of Orpheus who charm the underworld with his music. He learns about Alexander the Great's fondness for musicians in his court, and of course he compares himself frequently and at length to Apollo, god of music light and increasingly public vanity. One afternoon, after a particularly dramatic practice session involving props and a thrown cushion, Nero turns to Turpnos and asks, "Do you think history will remember me more for my voice or my victories?" Turpnos, blinking slowly, replies, "Well, that depends how loud you sing, my prince." At night, the villa becomes quieter, but only marginally. Nero often insists on evening recitals, even when the only audience is a sleepy garden owl, and yourself swaying in place and trying not to yawn too obviously. Your own responsibilities expand. You're now expected to maintain not just the instruments, but also Nero's mood. If he's in a lyrical spiral over the wrong chord progression, or the betrayal of a particularly squeaky reed pipe, it's your job to nod empathetically and suggest a breath break. He also begins composing, badly at first. His earliest works are dramatic odes to things like roasted boar, his mother's temper, and a surprisingly mournful ballad titled Ode to My Lost Sandal. But his output grows more refined. He starts using structured meter, experimenting with modes and harmonies, and even attempts an epic about the founding of Rome, told entirely through the viewpoint of a disgruntled goose. You begin to see what Terpnos sees. Beneath the self-indulgence and flourishes, Nero has a genuine fascination with music's power. Not just how it sounds, but how it feels, how it can elevate, soothe, seduce, and command. In a way, it is the perfect training for an emperor. Of course, not everyone in the villa is thrilled. You overhear senators grumbling in the baths. He wants to sing while the barbarians batter our gates. Others complain that the boy shows more respect to his lyre than the Senate. Still, Agrippina, Nero's formidable mother, approves publicly anyway. She sees it as useful theatre. A singing prince is a harmless prince, right? One morning, while prepping Terpnos's music scrolls, you hear the news that Caligula's assassins have made their final move, and Claudius Nero's great-uncle has taken the throne. The politics grow tense. Whispers rustle through the villa, like dry leaves. But Nero, oblivious or uninterested, is upstairs learning a tricky Greek ballad about fishermen and the moon. He hums it constantly, badly. In the months that follow, Nero's education expands. He takes rhetoric lessons, military strategy, philosophy, and yet he always returns to music. His tutors grumble, but they can't compete with the fire in his eyes when a new melody lands just right. Ternos begins to soften too. At first, he was all formality and forced smiles. Now, occasionally, you catch him tapping along with the rhythm. He's even written a few pieces with Nero, one of which, shockingly, is kind of catchy. You hum it under your breath while arranging parchment. One day Nero performs a duet with another young noble. It goes smoothly until his partner receives more applause. You watch the fury behind Nero's smile. The boy is learning that sharing a stage isn't always satisfying. The noble boy later transfers to a distant posting in Britannia. You don't ask questions. Your role continues to evolve. You carry messages, deliver performance announcements, and once memorably, you hold a curtain rod steady for nearly an hour because Nero decided dramatic entrances deserve structural integrity. Still, there's something endearing in his commitment. You think back to when he could barely pluck a string without wincing. Now he performs complex pieces from memory, sometimes even without scaring away the birds. And then comes the day he performs in front of a visiting dignitary from Alexandria. The entire villa holds its breath. The song dedicated to the Egyptian god Thoth is long, strange, and shockingly moving. When it ends, there's a beat of silence, then polite applause, then more. Nero beams. He bows so deeply he nearly topples forward. And then he says, "I think I should perform for the people next." You exchange a wide-eyed glance with Terpnos. He gives a tiny shake of his head, the universal sign for, oh no, he means it. And somewhere in the courtyard a goose lets out a mournful honk, perhaps in approval. You're awakened just before dawn by the sound of someone singing scales in the distance. It's not unusual Nero sings at all hours now, but this time the tone is different. It's louder, more determined, and if you're not mistaken, it's echoing across the forum. He's doing it. He's actually doing it. Nero has declared that his voice, already so cherished in the villa, must now be shared with the Roman public. And not through whispers or rumors. No, he wants a real audience, a stage and applause loud enough to shake the columns of Jupiter's temple. You trudge to the rehearsal chamber, which has been hastily turned into a miniature amphitheater. There are cushions laid out in careful symmetry, lit torches entirely too early in the morning, and Nero himself standing center stage, in a tunic embroidered with little golden lyres. He's holding a scroll of lyrics, squinting dramatically. Turnos is there too. He looks resigned. You suspect he's slept even less than you have. Still, he dutifully tunes the cithara while Nero announces to no one in particular that this performance will mark a new golden age of artistic emperorship. He wants to call it Dies Harmoniae, the day of harmony. You spend the next few days caught in a whirlwind of rehearsals. Nero insists on writing 3 new songs, each more ambitious than the last. One includes a thunder effect made by shaking a bronze shield behind a curtain. Another requires someone to imitate the sound of a mournful dolphin. Guess who gets that job? To be fair, Nero isn't entirely wrong in thinking he has a flair for performance. He has an expressive face, grand gestures, and a booming voice that projects all the way across the garden. You find yourself humming his tunes without meaning to. Terpnos catches you once and mutters, "Beware, it's contagious." Beware, it's. Preparations continue at a feverish pace. Nero designs his own costume, one that takes 5 servants to help him into. He commissions a crown of gilded laurel leaves, and he handpicks the audience a curious collection of poets' sycophants, visiting dignitaries, and at least 2 startled senators who were promised an intimate cultural gathering without further details. The night arrives. You stand just behind the curtain with Terpnos, who smells faintly of sandalwood and despair. Nero bounces on the balls of his feet, humming his opening note like a gladiator psyching himself up for battle. He whispers, "Do you think the people will weep?" You glance at Terpnos. He offers a diplomatic answer. "With any luck, my lord." The curtain parts. Nero strides onto the stage, arms outstretched, bathed in torchlight. The crowd, caught between curiosity and fear, offers scattered applause. He launches into his opening number, a ballad about the birth of Rome as told by a singing eagle. It's not subtle. You watch as the audience shifts between confusion, admiration, and a kind of glassy-eyed politeness that's become fashionable in imperial circles. After all, who's going to boo a singing emperor? Still, something strange happens by the second song. He starts to connect. The crowd leans in. They nod along to the rhythm. One senator even taps his foot cautiously, like a man approaching a suspicious-looking jellyfish. By the final number, a lament for a dying fig tree in poetic dactylic hexameter, there's actual applause. Real, spontaneous, uncoerced applause. You blink in disbelief. So does Terpnos. Nero bows with the practiced grace of a veteran actor. He holds the final note for an absurd amount of time, face-flushed arms trembling. When he finishes, the silence is immediate, then shatters with clapping. He doesn't stop smiling for the rest of the night. Later in the villa's inner garden, you overhear Nero telling a nervous servant that he has found his destiny. Not politics, not war. Art. And now that the public knows what he can do, he must perform more often, much more often. Thus begins the next phase of your life, Nero's court concerts. He performs monthly, then bi-weekly, then whenever the weather is agreeable. Invitations become mandatory. Public statues are commissioned not of him in armor or on horseback, but clutching a lyre with lips parted mid-note. Coins are minted with images of Apollo and subtle resemblances to Nero's own slightly too curly hair. Historians still argue whether this was bold cultural innovation or an emperor's unchecked ego spiraling out of orbit. You're not sure either, but you are sure that you've heard the phrase melodic divine resonance more times than any person reasonably should. At one point, Nero begins composing an opera, a full one. He wants it performed in Greek and Latin with live animal cameos and a chorus of orphans. You help sew feathers onto the tunics of backup singers playing birds. You once chase a goat off stage mid-rehearsal. You spend 3 days trying to source a harpist who won't collapse under the pressure of playing the music of the heavens as Nero ascends a painted staircase to symbolize his apotheosis.
Even Terpnos starts to crack. You catch him pacing at night, muttering, "It wasn't meant to be this loud."
But there's a strange charm in it all. Nero, for all his faults, truly loves music. He listens, he studies, he asks questions like, do you think the Dorian mode inspires civic loyalty? Or should my next ballad include a panther metaphor? And there are moments fleeting but real where his voice soars just right, where the night air hangs still and the empire seems for a heartbeat wrapped in song. You fall asleep those nights humming the tune. You dream of marble halls and candlelight, of laurel leaves and echoes, because even though Nero may someday burn half of Rome, conquer kingdoms and rewrite history with his own golden pen tonight, he's just a boy who wants to sing.
And you're there, towel in hand, ready for his next note.
You wake to find a scroll tucked beneath your breakfast tray. It smells faintly of rose oil and ambition. Unrolling it, you discover Nero's latest decree, written in his own enthusiastic, slightly crooked hand, a tour of song. The provinces must hear me. You blink twice. Yes, Nero wants to take his act on the road, not just across Rome, not just to nearby villas. He wants a full imperial tour performances in Greece, Egypt, Asia Minor, and beyond. The emperor is going on a musical journey, and naturally you're coming too. You Terpnos, a caravan of costume trunks and at least 3 poor souls tasked with transporting Nero's favorite echo-inducing amphorae for stage atmosphere. The logistics are staggering. Horses must be fed, stages built, citharas tuned to local humidity. You help pack everything from vocal exercise scrolls to jars of imported honey for throat clarity. At some point, you find yourself oiling Nero's favorite sandals because he believes they make him look more heroically melodic. Terpnos, for his part, is mostly quiet. You suspect he's accepted his fate with the stoicism of a condemned man who's also been asked to hold a tambourine. The tour begins in earnest with a performance in Neapolis where Nero receives a thunderous welcome, not necessarily for his voice, but because he arrives in a chariot drawn by 4 white peacocks. You honestly didn't know peacocks could pull anything, but apparently neither did they. It takes 2 hours and much cooing to calm them. The concert itself surprisingly competent. The Neapolitans are fond of music, and Nero's blend of heartfelt poetry and dramatic eyebrow movement wins them over. He performs an original ballad called Waves of Empire, which features an extended metaphor about sea foam and destiny. The applause is long and only mildly coerced. From there the tour picks up speed. You visit Corinth, where Nero insists on performing in the nude in the Greek tradition. Terpnos tactfully offers him a gauzy toga instead, and you make a note to travel with extra fabric from now on. In Athens, Nero composes a musical homage to Socrates, which includes several verses sung in imitation of a confused owl. The locals aren't sure what to make of it, but they nod respectfully anyway. The real surprise, though, is how into it Nero gets. He begins studying regional styles. He imitates the nasal chants of Eastern rites, the vibrant percussion of Nubian dances, even the soft string music of Phoenician merchants. He experiments, constantly adding flutes here, swapping lyrics there, rewriting verses mid-performance. Historians still argue whether these musical mashups were true innovation or chaotic cultural pastiche, but in the moment you're just impressed. He hasn't lost his voice. One night, in a coastal town whose name you forget, you watch Nero perform under the stars. The amphitheatre overlooks the sea. The audience is draped in soft linen wine cups in hand, listening to a young emperor sing about starlight and fate. For a brief moment, it's magical. Then a stray cat wanders on stage, and Nero tries to incorporate it into a duet. It does not go well. Travel wears on all of you. Terpnos develops a twitch in his left eye. You learn how to unpack a stage curtain in under 2 minutes. Nero, to his credit, performs every single night with an exhausting amount of passion. He sings through fever's sandstorms and once during a minor earthquake that rattled his high notes. You pass through Alexandria, where he attempts a composition based on the movements of the Nile. He insists on practicing near the actual river, and you spend half a day swatting flies and explaining why crocodile grunts probably don't qualify as percussion instruments. Still the crowds come? They come because he's the emperor. Because refusing isn't really an option, but also just maybe because there's something oddly human about this spectacle. A man who rules the world desperately trying to be heard, not as a tyrant, but as a tenor. In Rhodes, Nero hosts an impromptu music contest and awards himself first prize. He gives Terpnos second. You get an honourable mention for best backstage support, which you suspect is a polite way of saying excellent curtain holder. And so the tour continues. Each city adds something to the act. A new instrument, a local rhythm, a decorative flourish. Nero now wears cloaks that trail behind him like sails, sometimes accompanied by dancers dressed as muses or storm clouds. One evening he insists the audience throw laurel leaves instead of applause, a softer sound and more fragrant. The emperor begins speaking in lyric phrasing even off stage. You catch him composing while eating grapes, muttering rhymes between bites. He refers to meals as intermissions and baths as vocal sanctuaries. And while many mutter about his neglect of military affairs or legal matters, others begin to whisper, "Is this what peace looks like?" A singing emperor. You start to wonder too. Then, in the seaside town of Myra, disaster strikes. Mid-performance, a strong wind gusts across the stage, sending Nero's scroll flying into the sea. He freezes, caught mid-line. The audience, unsure if it's part of the act, begins slow clapping.
Nero panics. He tries to ad-lib. It turns into an impromptu sea shanty that mentions fish of destiny and gull betrayal. It's not great.
Backstage, he collapses onto a velvet chaise and moans, "My genius is waterlogged." You help mop his brow, while Terpnos, uncharacteristically gentle, reassures him, "Even Apollo had off nights, my lord." That seems to do the trick. Nero perks up. By morning, he's composing again, this time a sonnet to the lost scroll, which he declares the greatest thing I never wrote. You pack up and move on. The tour continues, slightly less triumphant now, but with even more earnestness, because Nero may never win over every audience, but he'll never stop trying.
And frankly, you suspect neither will you.
By now, you've seen things no imperial servant should be expected to see. You've watched Nero belt out a love ballad while astride a golden-painted ostrich. You've helped coax a stage-shy flute player out from behind a potted olive tree. You've even translated applause patterns into what Nero calls ovation choreography. And yet somehow today is still a surprise. This morning, Nero has decided that singing alone is no longer enough. No, his next performance must include acting, tragedy, comedy, maybe both. He's been reading plays, he says, and finds himself moved to inhabit the roles, not merely sing around them. You stare at him. He's eating a fig with a stage mask in his lap. Ternos, ever the cautious diplomat, merely says, "Your voice does seem well suited to lamentation, my lord." Thus begins Nero's dramatic phase. You are now assistant to an emperor who insists on becoming a full thespian. His favourites are Greek tragedies, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, all of which he believes he can improve slightly through song. He starts rewriting the classics with new endings, usually involving his character being serenaded back to life or transforming into a constellation. The rehearsals are long, the wigs are many. You spend 3 days trying to secure a prop lightning bolt that glows when shaken. Terpnos is tasked with creating dramatic sound cues using stretched animal hide drums. Nero begins speaking exclusively in iambic pentameter, even when asking for his sandals. Your first taste of this new artistic era is a performance of Orestes wherein Nero plays all the roles, yes, all of them. He changes masks mid-scene, sometimes mid-sentence. It's ambitious. The audience is stunned into silence for much of it, unsure whether they're witnessing artistic brilliance or a slow-motion chariot accident. By the end, they applaud politely, if cautiously, while a young boy faints dramatically in the second row, perhaps overwhelmed by all the tragic monologuing. Still, Nero is convinced he has found his true calling. He begins training with retired actors. He studies movement, posture, and the art of the theatrical sigh. He practices tragedy faces in the mirror, sometimes for hours. At one point, he experiments with sobbing on cue by slicing onions just off stage. You later discover he's allergic. Meanwhile, his political advisors are quietly losing their minds. Senators murmur about imperial dignity. Generals complain that the empire is being run by a theatre troupe. But Nero remains blissfully absorbed in his art. He declares the court a cultural sanctuary and insists that decisions of state wait until after rehearsals. Historians still argue whether this was Nero escaping power or redefining it. Some say he was simply avoiding the brutal machinery of empire. Others believe he thought he could rule better by understanding the hearts of men, especially if those hearts were holding dramatic soliloquies. You're not sure. All you know is that you're spending your days sewing stage curtains and your nights helping Nero choose whether murderous regret is best performed in a whisper or a scream. One evening, you're in a makeshift dressing room in Ephesus surrounded by jars of stage makeup and prop daggers. Nero is pacing mumbling lines from a scene where his character is betrayed by a ghostly brother. He stops, suddenly turns to you and asks, "Do you think I'm too subtle?" You look at the velvet tunic embroidered with weeping eyes and the glistening fake blood trailing down his arm. Maybe just a touch, you say. The performances begin drawing mixed reactions. Some towns adore them, others are confused. A few are deeply alarmed, but in every case they clap, because they have to, but also maybe because they can't look away. He's the emperor after all, the man who controls armies and laws, and now he's weeping on stage asking the heavens why love and loyalty are never enough. There's something oddly disarming about it. You begin noticing that more citizens are coming voluntarily. They bring their children. They hum the melodies afterward. Local actors and poets gather arguing whether Nero's portrayal of Phaedra was bold or unhinged. In Pergamon, Nero performs the fall of Troy using puppets and live narration. It's one of his better ideas until the puppet horse collapses mid-show and a soldier backstage shouts "medic" out of habit. You patch it up with wine crates and relabel the incident as postmodern symbolism. Then comes a performance that changes everything. In the city of Delphi, sacred home to Apollo Nero, stages a play in the temple's outer courtyard. He claims it is his greatest tribute to the god of music and prophecy. The script is a fever dream of verse and vision, part biography, part invention. He plays a priest who sings truths no one wants to hear and who is ultimately exiled by his own silence. You watch from behind a marble pillar as the audience listens, really listens. Not just because they're afraid, but because something in Nero's voice, strained cracking but sincere, catches them. There are no cheers, no forced applause, just a hush that hangs like fog in olive branches. Afterward, Nero doesn't say much. He sits on a low stone bench and eats bread, slowly watching the torches flicker. You sit beside him, neither of you speaking. Even Terpnos keeps a respectful distance, tuning his cithara like a man whispering to the wind. That night, Nero murmurs a single line, maybe this. This is what it means to be known. You wonder what he means, as emperor, as artist, as a man. He doesn't elaborate. He just stares at the stars. By morning, he's already scribbling a new idea, an opera about prophetic dreams in a world ruled by silence. It's called The Whispering Crown, and he wants you to help with the costume sketches. You not already reaching for your charcoal? Because no matter how absurd it gets, no matter how many masks, monologues, or musical tragedies unfold, you've started to believe in something too.
Not the grandeur, not the power,
But the strange, sincere little voice that keeps trying to be heard. By now, Nero no longer just performs. He curates entire experiences. Each show is a sonic pilgrimage, as he calls it, complete with incense, live birds, and interpretive dancers who spend half the evening pretending to be emotions. You spend most of your time helping them decide which fabric most accurately represents wistful shame.
it's a full-time job.
But as his stagecraft grows more elaborate, so too does his audience. Word spreads across provinces and palaces, marketplaces and academies. Senators groan, but young poets write odes about his voice. Artisans carve tiny Nero figurines with movable arms so they can weep with passion mid-scene. In some towns, citizens skip entire workdays just to get a seat. And then with the subtlety of a falling bronze statue, it happens. Nero decides to compete in the Olympic Games. Not in the traditional foot races or javelin contests, no. Nero wants to enter the arts competitions. Ancient Olympics, you see, weren't just about who could throw the farthest or wrestle the greasiest man. They also had poetry and music categories. And Nero smells an opportunity. You're informed of this development while applying shimmer powder to a helmet he insists on wearing to reflect my inner radiance. Terpnos drops his tuning fork in disbelief. The court scrambles, officials beg him to reconsider, but he's made up his mind. Nero will sing, recite, and perhaps, just perhaps, even deliver a dramatic monologue while slowly turning in place for dramatic emphasis. When Rome's officials express concern about the emperor's time being spent on theatrical contests rather than matters of state, Nero responds by composing an epic lullaby for the Roman Senate. It's 4 stanzas, longer than it needs to be, and features a metaphor comparing tax policy to a wayward goose. Historians still argue whether this episode reveals Nero's detachment from reality or a uniquely absurd form of political commentary. You argue that it was simply a poor metaphor, but no one listens to the curtain assistant. In the weeks leading up to the Olympics, training becomes more intense. Nero hires vocal coaches from Rhodes theatrical mimes from Alexandria, and even a scribe whose sole task is to applaud at emotionally appropriate moments during rehearsals. You're put in charge of atmospheric cohesion. You're still not sure what that means. The trip to Greece is a spectacle. Nero arrives in a golden litter shaped like a lyre, flanked by boys dressed as woodland spirits. His luggage includes 24 tunics, 12 performance wreaths, and a portable perfume chamber that diffuses myrrh during costume changes. Upon arrival, he's treated like visiting royalty, which, to be fair, he is. The Greeks are torn between bemusement and diplomacy. Several prominent officials mysteriously retire for the season. The competition takes place in a massive theatre just outside Olympia. The seats are packed with citizens, scholars, merchants, and a suspicious number of goats. You suspect some of them were bribed with olives to sit still. Nero takes the stage in a deep blue robe embroidered with shooting stars. He opens with a poem about the beauty of fate transitions into a haunting melody about ships lost at sea, and closes with a spirited reenactment of a Spartan mother weeping into her lentils. The crowd stares,
Then claps.
then stops clapping and begins again when Nero looks slightly disappointed. He wins, of course, by unanimous decree. You try not to notice the judge hastily erasing a name and scribbling Nero in large, triumphant letters. The award is a crown of olive leaves and a small statue, which Nero immediately names Musi, and insists must travel beside him in all future performances. After the Olympics, Nero continues his tour of Greek festivals, winning every artistic prize along the way. He performs at the Pythian Games, the Isthmian Games, and even a smaller regional competition where the audience is mostly pigeons and two elderly farmers who nod approvingly at every key change. With every victory, Nero grows bolder. He starts writing his own tragedies, though they mostly end with his character being tragically misunderstood and also secretly divine. You begin noticing a pattern. Each play mirrors some version of his life. A cursed prince, a lonely prophet, a soldier who just wants to be loved for his poetry. It's not subtle. In one particularly on-the-nose scene, a character named Hero N is betrayed by jealous advisors and dies while reciting his final aria to a moonbeam. Terpnos leans over to you mid-rehearsal and whispers, "Do you think he knows it's autobiographical?" You shake your head. "I think he hopes it is." Behind the scenes, things begin to feel more fragile. Nero's moods swing with the success of each performance. A missed note can send him into an hour-long sulk. A forgotten line becomes a betrayal of the narrative. You find yourself rehearsing disaster contingency plans, who calms him, who fetches the honey water, who distracts him with compliments about his earlobes. Still the performances go on. At the height of his theatrical glory, Nero stages an unprecedented event, a full-day dramatized musical version of the entire Iliad, with himself in multiple roles, including Helen. It takes 12 hours. You have no idea how you're still standing by the end. Even Terpnos falls asleep briefly during the Achilles sings to his sandals interlude. Nero remains dazzlingly awake. He claims to have achieved catharsis. You claim to have achieved the world's most elegant yawn. And then just as suddenly as it began, the performances pause. Not end, never that. But Nero becomes reflective. He starts asking questions like, "Do you think they see me or just the role?" He writes sad little notes in the margins of his scripts. You find one that simply reads, "If I vanish mid-song, will they finish the chorus?" It's your job to collect the costumes, to gather the laurel crowns, to pack up the stage curtains and travel once more. But this time you do so a little slower, because for all the absurdity, for all the theatrics and egotism and olive leaf tiaras, there's something gently human in the Emperor's gaze as he watches the empty theatre seats one last time. And whether you believe it or not, you start to feel it too. You return to Rome on a ship, heavy with awards costumes and one extremely seasick court poet. Nero insists on performing a farewell ballad to the Aegean before you dock, composed entirely in minor keys and dolphin imagery. The crew applauds politely, albeit with mild nausea. Back on land, things feel different. The city is still here, its grand arches, its murmuring fountains, its ever-muttering senators. But there's a curious hush about it now, as if Rome itself paused to wonder what you've all been doing. You walk past the Senate building and notice the faint smell of dust and disuse. Nero hasn't held a full council meeting in months. Rumors have begun swirling like pigeons in the forum.
Nero, of course, notices none of this.
He's still flush from his Grecian glory. He demands a full festival in his honor, something modest, he says. Just 12 days, with fireworks and incense fountains and a rotating stage. You're handed a scroll labeled New Roles for the Imperial Artistic Renaissance. It contains 25 characters Nero intends to perform, including a blind harpist with prophetic elbows and a shape-shifting river god who sings in underwater harmonies. You read the scroll twice and sit down hard. Meanwhile, the palace is now half dressing room, half temple. Costumes spill into council chambers. Wigs are stored in amphorae. The imperial treasury has somewhat mysteriously begun listing lyre string replenishment as a major expense. But the Nero's most curious addition to court life is something he calls the sacred ensemble. It's a troupe of musicians, actors, dancers, and you, yes, you, whom he declares instruments of divine resonance. You are all granted official titles. You, for reasons never fully explained, are named Keeper of Dramatic Echoes. It sounds fancy until you realize your duties mostly involve hiding spare sandals and providing emergency applause. Still, there's something weirdly touching about it all. You rehearse daily. The sacred ensemble practices morning stretches while reciting epic verse. There are musical duels, interpretive pantomimes, and philosophical debates over which fruit best represents longing. One man argues for the fig. Another insists it's the pomegranate. A third suggests celery and is quietly removed. Turnos teaches breathing techniques to a group of teenagers in tunics too long for their legs. You find yourself growing oddly attached to the chaos. But as the performances ramp up again, something darker begins to creep in around the edges.
Nero becomes obsessed with legacy. Not fame, not exactly, but something more permanent. He starts drafting musical inscriptions he wants carved into marble. He asks you to invent a new musical notation system so future empires can hear my weeping.
One day he shows you a clay tablet with his name etched into a musical scale. This, he says, will be the tone of eternity. You nod slowly and wonder how one even tunes eternity. Historians still debate whether this period marks Nero's descent into delusion or a desperate plea to be remembered for something more than law and blood. Some believe his art was an escape from paranoia. Others argue it was a form of control, controlling the narrative through song, through performance, through sheer volume. You just think he was lonely. At night, Nero starts holding impromptu readings in the moonlit palace gardens. He performs monologues to the flowers, occasionally stopping to rewrite a line if the tulips look unimpressed. You bring him water, sometimes wine, and once a small harp you strung yourself out of boredom and string beans. He actually likes it. There's a moment one clear evening where you sit beside him on a bench made of old stage prop. The moon hangs low, the olive trees rustle like gossiping servants, and Nero says, "Do you think any of it mattered?" He doesn't mean war or governance or laws.
He means the music, the plays, the laughter, however forced. You don't answer?
Instead, you hum a quiet tune, one of his own, something about a mother calling to her son across a river. It's not grand, it's not particularly original, but Nero listens, really listens, and then without looking at you, he joins in. For the first time in months, you sing together. The next day, the Senate sends a formal message requesting an audience. Rome is restless. There are whispers, uprisings, betrayals, conspiracies. People are beginning to question the emperor, who sings more than he rules. Nero surprisingly agrees to meet them. But first he schedules a dress rehearsal. You help him into his performance robe, deep purple, stitched with threads of gold, and a pattern meant to resemble the constellations. He checks his reflection and nods solemnly.
If they want words, he says, I'll give them a soliloquy.
You follow him to the grand hall where senators wait like statues and soldiers shift uneasily by the columns. Nero strides in, not as ruler, but as performer. He begins speaking not of taxes or decrees, but of fate, of beauty, of music and sorrow, and the cruelty of being misunderstood.
It's not diplomacy.
It's theatre, and for a moment it works. Even the most hardened senators blink. Some lean forward. One of them whispers, "Is this from Euripides?" Another shakes his head. "I think it's original." But when the performance ends, the room doesn't applaud, it just exhales. You help him back to his chamber. He says nothing, just removes his robe and sets it gently across a chair. That night, Nero sleeps early, and you sit by the window watching the torches outside flicker in the wind. Somewhere, Terpnos plays a soft melody, just 3 notes, over and over.
You don't know what tomorrow brings.
But tonight, for one brief, improbable stretch of time, an emperor tried to sing his soul into history.
And you helped him carry the tune.
Morning arrives slowly. The palace is unusually quiet. No rehearsals, no tunic fittings, no echoing verses from behind tapestry-covered doors. Even the usually excitable wine steward walks with more hush than hustle. You find Nero in the courtyard, seated cross-legged on a stone bench, staring at a fountain that hasn't worked properly since the last interpretive flood scene. He doesn't look up when you approach. "I dreamt I was a reed," he says softly. "Hollow but useful." You decide not to ask follow-up questions. The sacred ensemble, once lively with costumes and clashing egos, is beginning to scatter. Some members have gone home to their provinces, others remain hovering like stagehands after final curtain. You all pretend it's just a short intermission, that Nero will soon demand an aria about sunrise or commission a choreographed lamentation.
But he doesn't.
He's quieter now, slower. He writes in a notebook made of pressed papyrus, often sketching abstract shapes and labeling them with emotions: guilt, rain on marble, the sound of missing applause. You find a drawing of what looks suspiciously like your own face, labeled "The Listener." He gives you fewer instructions these days, just gentle glances and the occasional question like, "Do you think the sea misses the boat when it's gone?" You answer the best you can, usually with metaphors involving dolphins or wine jugs. He seems satisfied. Still, tension hums in the city. The guards outside the palace carry their spears with more purpose. Letters arrive at odd hours and are read behind closed doors. You overhear a senator mention the word galba. That's never a good sign. Historians still argue whether this final stretch of Nero's reign was a descent into madness or a tragic slow-motion retreat from power. Some call it a death spiral. Others call it a final act. You start calling it the quiet verse. Then one morning, Nero decides to go on a walk. Not a grand procession, no trumpets. Just him, you, and two tired guards who look like they'd rather be peeling grapes. He wears a simple tunic and a hood pulled low. You carry a basket of dried figs, though he never touches them. You walk through neighborhoods rarely touched by emperors. The Subura is loud with life smells of bread and sheep and arguments. Children run past you. A woman yells something about taxes. Nero smiles faintly.
No one recognizes him. Or maybe they do and simply choose not to care.
At one point, he stops by a group of buskers performing a bawdy tune about a fishmonger's daughter. He watches, amused. When the musicians take a break, Nero reaches into his robe and tosses them a silver coin.
"Sing one about a singer who lost his audience," he says.
They look confused. One of them shrugs and begins improvising a tune about a golden-voiced god who forgot his crown. Nero laughs. You laugh too, though part of you wishes you hadn't. On the way back to the palace, Nero hums that same tune. His voice cracks a little on the high note. You pretend not to notice. He stops walking and looks at you.
"Do you think Rome ever loved me?"
You don't answer that one. That evening, he orders a small stage built in the atrium, nothing ornate, just a wooden platform and a curtain made from discarded rehearsal robes. He performs to no one in particular. Maybe to the walls, maybe to the gods, maybe just to you. He sings of rivers and regrets, of brothers who vanish into shadow, of mothers who never forgive, and mirrors that never flatter. The melody is uneven, the lyrics repeat. He forgets a line and laughs, then he sings it anyway. You find your throat tightening halfway through, not from sadness, just from recognition.
Afterward he bows.
Not a theatrical swoop, just a nod, and then he walks away, leaving his sandals on the stage. You leave them there. The next few days pass in fragments. Messages arrive with increasing urgency. You hear Galba's name again, louder this time. The Senate convenes behind locked doors. A general refuses a command. The sacred ensemble quietly dissolves. Terpnos hands you a scroll and says he's going south to tutor the son of a magistrate who thinks music is a discipline, not a performance. He hugs you awkwardly because of the harp strapped to his back and says, "Try not to turn into a metaphor." You wish him safe travels and return to packing up the last of Nero's sheet music. Then one night you're summoned. Nero sits in a small garden chamber lit only by a single oil lamp. He doesn't look imperial anymore. He looks like a man who's forgotten which role he's playing.
"I think they're coming for me," he says.
You don't ask who they are, he continues.
"I always thought music would save me, that if I sang well enough, if I made them feel, they wouldn't care about the rest."
He chuckles.
"I even wrote a final piece, a lullaby for the Senate."
He hums a few bars. It's simple, almost childlike.
He looks at you. "I want you to keep the music. Hide it, burn it, sing it. I don't care. Just don't let them turn me into silence."
You nod. You don't say goodbye. 'Cause what would be the point? He's still singing, even if the audience has turned away. Later, long after midnight, you sit in the costume chamber holding that final lullaby. You hum it to yourself once, then again, then a third time slower. You can't tell if it's beautiful, but you remember it.
And maybe that's enough. Morning again.
But this time, the sun feels reluctant, like it knows something's wrong, and would rather not rise at all. The palace echoes with the kind of silence that only follows a loud ending.
Nero is gone. You're not told where or how, just that it's finished. The way people say that when they want to close a book they haven't read.
There are no official proclamations yet, no statues pulled down, but everyone's behavior shifts. Servants whisper more, guards stand straighter, and you, once called keeper of dramatic echoes, are asked to return your ceremonial tunic.
You do.
And you fold it neatly. No one seems to know what to do with the stage Nero built in the atrium. It just sits there, empty, still holding his sandals. One of the kitchen boys suggests turning it into a fruit display. Another says they should burn it just in case it's cursed. You suggest leaving it alone for now, and surprisingly they listen. The city outside breathes differently now. You wander the streets more often, unsure what you're looking for. A memory, maybe. A note from a song you can't forget? Or just the quiet feeling of what now?
People are already rewriting things.
One senator declares that Nero never truly ruled, only entertained himself. Another calls him a failed tragedian. A third says he was mad from the moment he first held a lyre. You hear one man at a bathhouse claim Nero couldn't even carry a tune. You almost respond, almost. But instead you smile and dunk your head beneath the water. Historians still debate the manner of Nero's end. Whether he died alone or with a loyal companion. Whether he said something poetic or merely groaned. Some say he tried to recite a line from Homer, but forgot the words. Others say he simply whispered, "What an artist dies in me."
You don't know which version is true.
But you do know he meant it. Back at your room, smaller now tucked above a tavern, you unpack a bundle you swore you wouldn't keep. Sheet music, scribbled verses, a bronze plectrum with his initials carved backward because he liked how it looked. You begin sorting through it slowly, not out of duty, not even nostalgia, just curiosity. You hum some of the fragments softly like old lullabies for yourself. One of them makes you tear up unexpectedly. It's the river song, the one you sang together on the bench under the olive trees.
That was a real moment. No stage, no audience, just voices.
One evening, a merchant you barely remember from court invites you to dinner. He introduces you to his wife and tells her you were the emperor's echo. She asks what that means. You say I helped him sound like he wanted to be heard. They laugh politely.
You're not offended.
You understand now that memories echo differently in different rooms. As Rome reshapes itself, the city makes space for a new narrative. Nero becomes a cautionary tale, a byword. Plays mock him. Poets flatten him into punchlines. Someone paints his face on a chamber pot. It becomes a trend. Still, sometimes at night you catch snippets of his melodies hummed by children in alleyways, the rhythms twisted, the lyrics blurred, but the notes still there.
And that means something.
You meet with Terpnos once more months later. He's thinner, older, still carries that harp like it's part of his spine. You share wine. He doesn't mention Nero until the second bottle. He was exhausting, Terpnos says, and ridiculous, and sometimes brilliant. You both nod. Then you sing a few bars together, just for yourselves, no applause. The wind picks up, and you hear it rustle through the cypress trees the way it did that night on the bench. Terpnos wipes his eyes and blames the wine. You let him. The empire, meanwhile, moves on. Emperors rise, emperors fall, but art oddly, stubbornly remains. You hear whispers of a new play that draws heavily from one of Nero's scripts. The playwright denies it, claims divine inspiration. You smile anyway.
Because you know the truth.
Years pass. One day, a young performer finds you after a recital in a provincial amphitheatre. She heard you once trained under the singing emperor. Is it true he used to sing to grapes to see if they'd ripen faster? She asks. You pause. Yes, you say, smiling. And he swore it worked.
She laughs and runs off.
And just like that, the past isn't entirely gone. It's performed again, retold. Sung between lines and layered beneath harmonies. Not because it's perfect, but because it happened.
Because someone remembered. And
You are still humming. You wake one morning with the faint sound of music in your head, not a real melody, but the ghost of one. A half-remembered progression the way dreams sometimes borrow from lullabies. For a second, you expect to find Nero standing at the end of your bed arms, crossed, ready to ask, too tragic, or just tragic enough. But of course, it's just sunlight through thin curtains, and pigeons squabbling like second-rate sopranos outside your window. Life now moves more slowly. You teach music to small groups, children mostly, and the occasional bored senator's niece. You teach them scales breathing, how not to faint mid-area. But occasionally you also teach them something else, how to hold a note until it trembles slightly, how to close their eyes and imagine a sea of invisible listeners. You call it Nero's pause. They don't get the reference. That's probably for the best. One afternoon, a boy asks if you ever sang for real emperors. You nod.
what was he like? The boy presses.
You look at the reed flute in your hand and say, he tried very hard to be loved.
That seems to satisfy the boy. He resumes practicing.
You begin writing again, not music this time, but memories, vignettes. You avoid big claims or grand conclusions. Just the textures of life in Nero's orbit, the time he forgot the lyrics mid-performance and turned it into a comedic routine, earning real laughs for once. The night he demanded a thunderstorm for dramatic effect, and someone had to run around with a sheet of bronze and a pair of sandals to simulate lightning and thunder. You write about his silences too, the way he'd stare at his reflection in his wine, as if searching for a lyric he lost in there. Historians still argue whether Nero had any true talent or whether he simply performed so loudly and so often that people mistook persistence for genius. You lean toward the latter, but then again, what's genius if not refusal to be quiet? You receive an invitation to a private recital at a wealthy woman's villa near Ostia. She collects rare musical relics according to the letter, and someone told her you were a living one. You roll your eyes, but go anyway. Her garden is filled with sculptures of muses and turtles playing lyres. One of the statues, oddly enough, bears a passing resemblance to Nero. She claims it was based on a dream she had after eating spoiled oysters. Art, after all, finds its way through the strangest doors. She asks you to play something from the Neronian repertoire. You hesitate, then sit down and sing the river lament, slowly, softly, without the theatrical flair. Just the melody. The audience doesn't interrupt. Some of them close their eyes. One man quietly weeps, possibly because he's remembered a time before politics turned every sound into a signal. Afterward, the hostess thanks you and presses a gold coin into your hand. You find yourself whispering, "What an artist dies in me." She blinks. "What was that?" "Nothing," you say, "just an old stage cue."
On your way back, the cart hits a bump and your coin falls into the dust. You don't retrieve it.
Years roll forward. Hairstyles change. Temples rise and crumble. One emperor erects a sundial the size of a small village. Another bans all music, with flutes claiming it incites revolution. Historians still debate whether he meant literal flutes or just bad metaphors. But Nero's songs, they slip into taverns and back alleys. You hear his signature 5-note refrain played on panpipes by a girl with a basket of pears. You hear the lullaby whispered by a mother rocking a cranky toddler. You don't interrupt, you just listen. One day you visit the ruins of the Domus Aurea, or what's left of it. Weeds have claimed the marble, mosaics crack under careless sandals. A tour guide leads a group of wide-eyed nobles describing the madman who built an empire of song and fire. You stay quiet at the back until someone asks if Nero really sang while Rome burned. You mutter not quite under your breath. He sang before, he sang after, maybe during, but never about the fire. A few heads turn, the guide frowns, you shrug. That night, back in your small room above the tavern, you light a candle and sing that lullaby again. It's slower now, your voice has aged, but the song's still there. It always is. Some nights when the wind is just right, you imagine it traveling beyond the city, across rivers, over mountains, into the dreams of someone far away. Maybe a young scribe, maybe a tired widow, maybe a bored shepherd tuning his flute to pass the time.
And maybe they hum it back.
Because what is memory if not an echo sung softly enough to soothe? The winter that arrives the year you turn 60 is unusually gentle, as if the gods have agreed to let Rome exhale for once. The streets are damp but not frozen, the hearths warm but not crowded. The city murmurs with the low, contented drone of a world in between emperors who demand statues and emperors who demand silence. You move through it like a comfortable shadow. At this point, few people remember your name, but more than a few remember your voice. Not by its tone necessarily, but by the way it shaped things. How it once steadied an emperor's shaky rhythm. How it filled the long pauses between his lines like steam rising off a bath. A merchant greets you in the forum. "Ah, the man who used to teach tragedy to the emperor." You correct him. "No, I taught him how not to sound tragic when he didn't mean to." He laughs and offers you a fig. The baker down the street from your room insists you once composed a love song for Nero's third wife. You didn't. You barely spoke to her. But when he asks you to hum a few bars of what it might have sounded like, you oblige. It's good bread. You consider it a fair trade. One afternoon you receive a small scroll in crisp handwriting. It's from an archivist at the Library of Alexandria requesting your memories of Nero's lost opera. There were rumors apparently of a full-length tragicomedy he penned, but never performed, involving a haunted olive tree, a talking goat, and a woman named Lavinia who turns into sea foam. You snort. Of course, there were rumors. Historians still argue whether such a work ever existed. Some claim it was merely a draft composed during Nero's famously theatrical dreams. Others believe it was staged once for an audience of slaves and dismissed as too ridiculous, even for the emperor. You write back it was real. But the goat was added later. That was Terpnos's idea, not Nero's. They never reply. One evening, as you sip watered wine and squint at the flicker of oil lamp shadows on the wall, you find yourself recalling a moment long buried. Nero pacing nervously before a private concert, asking you just once, "What if they laugh?"
You'd said they will, and then they'll listen. And they had.
You still believe that? Laughter isn't failure, it's an opening, a breath before the note. At a local theatre, a new satirical play emerges, gently ribbing Rome's past rulers. Nero naturally plays a role, played by a man with an oversized wig and a shriek instead of a voice. The audience laughs at every pratfall. When he bursts into an absurdly high aria about poisoned figs, the house erupts. You watch from the back.
And strangely that you're not offended.
Because satire keeps memory breathing. And because somewhere under all the mockery, someone in that audience is hearing the melody. Maybe not the words, maybe not even the man, but the note, the pitch that still hums, stubborn and weird beneath the empire's ever-shifting rhythms.
A teenage boy asks to apprentice with you. He's a little tone-deaf and always smells vaguely of olives, but he has heart. You take him on, not to pass on any legacy, but because teaching, like singing, has its own music.
You show him how to breathe from his belly, how to wait 2 beats before delivering a line, how to hold space, not just in the song, but in the silences between verses. He asks you what Nero was really like. You pause and answer carefully. He was exhausting and self-involved and sometimes completely ridiculous. The boy nods. But you add, when he sang, sometimes for a second he forgot to be emperor. And that was when he got close to being something else entirely. The boy squints. A real artist. You chuckle. No, a real person. You pass through the forum one day and see a musician playing something eerily familiar. A variation on one of Nero's ballads, rearranged, modernized. A little faster. A little rougher, but it's there. The musician sees you watching and tips his head in a kind of bow. You tip yours back. In the distance, bells ring for an imperial ceremony. You ignore them. You've outlived 3 emperors now. The empire continues its strange, swirling waltz. But you've learned to sit still within it, to find the beat behind the noise. At night, you keep a box by your bedside filled with fragments, old scripts, song sheets, a broken stage prop shaped like a dolphin. Once it had been part of a sea scene from Nero's unfinished mythological tragedy. He wanted to play Poseidon naturally. The play never happened, but the prop survived. You keep it not because it's valuable, but because it makes you laugh. And because, even now in the quiet, you can still hear the emperor rehearsing his entrance line behind the curtain. Behold the sea and despair. He always flubbed the delivery. You start dreaming in verses, not full songs, just little snippets. An opening line here, a forgotten harmony there. They arrive without warning like stray cats at your window. You jot them down sometimes, but more often you just let them drift away content to know they visited. The city continues to pulse, but you've found your rhythm within it. Mornings are for tea and student recitals. Afternoons a short nap and maybe a slow walk down by the Tiber, where the swans still glide as if nothing has ever gone wrong. The world is louder now, faster too. New instruments you can't pronounce. Chords that clang rather than shimmer. But you've grown fond of the dissonance. It reminds you that Rome has always been a little off-key. At the baths, someone recognizes you. Not from any statue or inscription, but from a song.
You were the one, the old man says, who helped Nero hit that impossible note during the Apollo festival.
You blink. He didn't hit it. He cracked like a dropped jug. The man cackles, exactly, and somehow that made it perfect. Historians still argue whether that infamous crack was intentional, some daring interpretive choice, or simply the failing of a throat too dry with fear. You of course know the truth. Nero had eaten honeyed almonds right before going on stage. You'd warned him. He'd waved you off, declaring the gods adore almonds. You smile now, remembering how red his face had gone when the notes slipped away. In your quieter hours, you've begun compiling a little book. Nothing grand, just anecdotes, exercises, fragments of song. You call it Whispers from the Marble Stage. The title makes no sense, but you like the way it feels in your mouth. Your student helps you copy it onto fresh parchment. He adds little drawings in the margins, lyres with wings, a cat yawning mid-area, a caricature of Nero in a toga, holding a mirror, and a wine cup singing to a tree. Too much, he asked. Just enough, you reply. Once a young woman barefoot draped in a crimson shawl stops you on the street. She's heard your name. She says she sings for coins in the markets and wants to learn how to sing like they did in the old days. You offer to walk with her. As you stroll, you tell her about the breath, the way it should enter the body like a guest, not a thief. About timing, about resonance. She listens with wide, serious eyes. When you demonstrate a short phrase, she mirrors it perfectly.
You tell her she has a gift.
She laughs. Then why am I still sleeping on straw? You answer gently because the gods haven't decided who's listening yet. She doesn't like that answer, but she walks with you anyway. One night, a nobleman's son, spoiled, shiny-sandaled, practically jingling with jewelry, throws a private party. You're invited, not as a guest, but as a curiosity. An original he calls you from Nero's court. You're seated near the fountain, offered spiced wine and grapes so perfectly round they feel fake. They've hired performers to reenact a typical Neronian vocal contest. The singers wear ridiculous wigs and fake beards. One pretends to faint from overbreathing. You don't laugh, but you don't scowl either, because absurd as it is, they're still remembering. During dessert, some gelatinous monstrosity shaped like a phoenix. The nobleman sidles over and asks, was Nero truly mad? You sip your wine, not always.
What was his worst trait?
He wanted love more than respect. The man wrinkles his nose. That's not very Roman.
Exactly, you say.
Later that week, the young woman with the crimson shawl shows up again. She's learned the phrase you sang and added her own twist to it, a small melisma at the end, fluttering like bird wings.
It's better than your version.
You tell her so. She beams. When she leaves, you feel something small and unexpected pride, maybe. Or gratitude. Or perhaps the quiet echo of Nero's old question, the one he asked before every performance. Do you think they'll feel it?
And you do. For a moment standing there, you think they might.
You visit an old friend, Terpnos, the Cithara master, who's gone nearly deaf, but insists he can still hear through his fingertips. He lets you play a few notes on his old instrument. The strings are loose. The wood creaks like an old boat, but the sound is still lovely.
I dreamed about Nero last night, he says, eyes half closed. Oh,
he was singing underwater. Every time he opened his mouth, bubbles came out and tiny fish clapped.
Well, flick their fins politely.
You both laugh until your ribs hurt. Back home, you light a small candle and place it beside your window, just in case someone passing by might need a bit of warmth or wonder who else is still awake. The flame flickers against the wall, casting shadows that almost look like people, one tall and commanding, the other small and hunched, holding a lyre. You lie back and let the memory wash over you. Nero's center stage, trembling slightly, mouthing his first line, while the crowd buzzed like bees in a jar. You'd whispered from the wings, it's just breath and sound, let it out.
And he had.
The winters grow shorter, or maybe you just stop minding them. By now your joints hum like old harp strings, and you wake before the birds do. The student, he goes by Calvus now, though you're fairly sure that's not his birth name, has taken to running your errands and reminding you to eat things that aren't bread and dates. You let him, not because you need help, but because you've grown used to the shape of another presence in your day. Sometimes you pretend not to hear him when he nags. Sometimes you quote Nero's most pompous monologues at him until he rolls his eyes and walks away. This, too, is a kind of music. One late afternoon, you both take a seat outside the public library, where a minor poet is performing sonnets to a mildly engaged crowd. His lines are fine. His voice is forgettable. But he knows how to project from the belly, so you give him that. Calvus asks, what would Nero have thought of this? You consider it? He'd have thrown a laurel wreath and tried to top him on the spot. Could he have? You shrug, only if the crowd already loved him. Historians still debate whether Nero's appeal was ever more than stage-managed, whether the cheers were authentic or bought. But you remember the sparkle of surprise on his face the first time he got a genuine ovation. That look you can't fake, startled, half-horrified, fully human. You and Calvus return home in the blue-grey hush before night. On your doorstep is a parcel. Wrapped in oilskin, an old copy of your booklet, Whispers from the Marble Stage, now scribbled over with notes and additions in someone else's handwriting. A student of a student, perhaps, or a curious librarian who got bored. You read the marginalia aloud. One note reads, "Did the emperor really make his chorus dress as clouds?" You laugh so hard you wheeze. Yes, you tell Calvus. They wore gauze and kept getting tangled. One fainted from the heat.
He asks if you'll write a second volume.
You wave a hand, you write it. I'll correct your mistakes. That night, sleep comes quickly. But just before you drift off, you hear something, a thin, high note floating in from the alley. Someone practicing scales, the same exercises you'd once invented for Nero in a cramped corridor lined with tapestries. You smile into your blanket.
Because it's still out there, that thread.
You follow it the next day, trailing the sound to a small courtyard, where a girl, maybe 12, stands with her eyes shut, humming steadily. Her voice cracks a little, but she doesn't flinch. You wait for her to stop. When she opens her eyes and notices you, she's startled.
I didn't know anyone was listening, she says. That's when you're doing it right, you reply.
Her teacher steps out, a friend of Calvus, it turns out. They offer you a seat and tea that tastes like licorice. You stay for the rest of the lesson. From time to time, people send you letters addressed to that one guy who taught Nero to sing. Somehow the messengers always find you. Some of the letters are silly. Can I book you for a wedding? Others deeply thoughtful. Was his voice really that bad? Or are we just being unkind across centuries? One asks, what did you feel the moment Nero died? You don't answer that one. Not because it's too painful, but because you don't remember a single emotion. Just stillness, like a drumbeat skipped. And then everyone turned their heads as if waiting for a different kind of music to begin. You remember wondering what would happen to the empire without its strangest voice. You remember realizing not much would change. Rome would hum on in its grand and grumbling way. One morning, Calvus invites you to a performance in a theatre you haven't visited in decades. The benches are new, the torches trimmed low. A troupe of young performers are staging a farce based loosely on Nero's life. The emperor is played by a wiry boy with too much energy and a fake nose. The audience is loving it. When Nero starts singing his lament to a wilted laurel bush, a ripple of laughter sweeps the rows. It's silly, crude, and weirdly charming. You lean toward Calvus. His pitch is terrible. He's 12. So was Nero emotionally. At the end, the cast takes their bows. You don't stand or clap. You just sit there, letting the echo of the laughter settle in your bones. You feel something close to peace. Or at least a kind of fond absurdity. You dream again that night. This time, Nero is older, greying, singing not to a crowd, but to himself in a mirror. The notes are low, almost a murmur. Behind him, you're holding the script, mouthing the words along as if they still belong to both of you. You wake up smiling. Rome is quieter in your old age. Or maybe you've simply learned which noises to ignore. The clatter of carts fades more quickly. The barking dogs become a lullaby. Even the Forum with its endless dramas feels more like distant waves than shouts. You sit outside one afternoon, eyes half closed, sun warm on your face.
Someone walks past humming one of your old warm-ups. You don't open your eyes.
You don't need to. The city's changed again. You don't bother trying to keep up with every new fashion or political shuffle anymore. Now and then someone tries to explain it all, Calvus mostly, with his slightly too fast voice and habit of gesturing at nothing. He names new senators, new edicts, even a new tax on fruit sellers that's causing mild public outrage.
You nod. You file it all under interesting but not urgent.
Because your days revolve around different things now. Things like tea steeped just a bit too long, a good cushion that doesn't flatten by mid-morning, a breeze that hits your shoulder just right while you're scribbling half-legible notes about vowel placement. And memory, mostly memory. Sometimes in the still hours of morning you sit at your little desk and try to write it all down. Not as a memoir, those are for generals and war horses, but as a trail of breadcrumbs. Notes for future dreamers. You call the collection How to Sing with a Tyrant. Calvus says you need a better title.
He's probably right, but you're too old to rebrand.
The pages are a mess. Anecdotes drift into breathing diagrams. One section opens with Rule number 4. Do not eat figs during rehearsals, then trails off into a sketch of a toga with musical notes embroidered on the hem. You never get around to Rule 5. Historians still debate whether Nero's obsession with performance was truly a political strategy or just the world's most expensive midlife crisis. You've always leaned toward the second option. After all, nothing about him was subtle. He once delayed a Senate meeting because he hadn't quite captured the emotional tone of his aria. That same week, he made the whole court rehearse snapping in rhythm. You snap your fingers now, chuckling at the memory. You can still feel the sting of it, the ache in your thumb joint from too many attempts at synchronized rhythm. Even the guards got involved. Some were better than you'd expect. One guard in particular had a surprisingly delicate sense of syncopation. You think his name was Linus? Or maybe Otho? They all blurred together, helmeted and stoic, until they didn't have to be.
And yet, it worked sometimes. When the audience was tipsy enough and the moon was high, there were nights when Nero's voice didn't shake, when the torchlight flattered his features just right, and the crowd, well, they wanted to believe. So they did.
There's comfort in that, you think. The power of wanting something to be beautiful even when it wobbles. At supper one evening, Calvus reads you a poem written by someone he's mentoring. It's all about forgotten voices, those who taught the singers, who painted the sets, who tuned the lyres. Your name isn't in it, of course, but it doesn't need to be. You're there anyway.
You tell him it's good?
And you suggest the third stanza needs to be rewritten entirely. He groans. You always say that. And I'm always right, except about my cooking. You pause spoon mid-air. We are not starting that debate again. He changes the subject. Smart boy. You visit the ruins of the old Domus Aurea with him the next week, what's left of Nero's sprawling palace. Most of it's buried now, shadowed under newer buildings. But there are still fragments, gilded tiles, a painted ceiling here or there. Faint hints of a time when everything smelled like perfume and ego. You stand in what used to be the grand dining hall. It's cooler than you remember. The acoustics are strange now, too. Echoes bounce unpredictably, as if the space isn't quite sure where your voice belongs.
I sang here once, you whisper.
Calvus raises an eyebrow. You not Nero. You grin. We were rehearsing. He panicked and threw up behind a curtain. Someone had to cover. You're not sure why you'd never told that story before. Maybe it felt too silly. Or maybe back then you thought it was a failure. Now it's one of your fondest memories. Because in that moment, faced with a panicked emperor, a buzzing audience, and a sudden need to perform, you just sang. You didn't think, you didn't plan, you just let the sound rise and fill the room. And no one booed, not even once. You run your fingers along the chipped wall. It's damp to the touch, cold, but the kind of cold that wakes something in you. A hum, maybe. A vibration. as if the room remembers too.
Do you want to head back? Calvus asks.
You shake your head. Let's stay a while. You sit on a low stone ledge and listen. To the soft drip of water, to the faintest breeze dragging dust along the floor, and somewhere inside your skull to a note that's still reverberating, faint but unmistakable. You hum very softly.
Calvus joins you.
Not in harmony, not quite in time, but you both smile because this too is a song. The fireflies are back. Rome doesn't have many left, not really. Too much marble, too much smoke, not enough meadows. But sometimes, if you're lucky and a little patient, you'll catch one blinking lazily near the city's edge. Like a note held too long. You sit on your porch most nights now, a blanket over your knees, a warm cup of barley broth at your elbow. The stars blink into place one by one, as if they're waiting for their cue. You don't speak much. You don't need to. Calvus is inside writing something. You're not sure if it's poetry or a shopping list. The line between those two has always been blurrier than most admit. You hum softly. One of your old warm-ups, minor thirds, a quick little run, nothing fancy. You hum it more for your own comfort than anything else. The way a child might stroke the edge of a familiar blanket. Tonight it echoes a little. You frown, not because it's odd, but because it feels purposeful. Then you hear it again, the same run, same notes, a second voice shy but sure. You turn. Across the alley, in a window crack, just enough someone else is humming back. A girl, maybe, or a boy. Doesn't matter, they're picking up your tune and tossing it back like a ball. You raise your pitch. They follow. This continues for a few minutes, an invisible duet across the rooftops. You add a trill, they echo it, you rest. They take the lead, you smile so wide it hurts your cheeks. This is how it begins again. Historians still argue whether the line of Roman singing masters ever truly broke, whether the art died with Nero's scandal or lingered in pockets passed quietly, student to student, neighbor to neighbor. No records survive, no scrolls, no signed testimonials. But then again, some things aren't written. Some things are just heard. The next morning, Calvus finds you already awake, scribbling on the back of an old grocery receipt.
What's that, he asks.
A new warm-up, you say, chewing your lip, inspired by last night's duet.
Duet?
You shrug. With a ghost or a prodigy, hard to tell from that distance. He squints at the notation. That's in Phrygian mode.
You say that like it's illegal.
Just ambitious. You beam. Always was.
Later that week, a letter arrives. No name, no sender. Just a scrap of parchment reading, "I've been practicing your vowel ladder. Thank you." Below that, a rough sketch of a lark, or maybe a goose. Honestly, the wings are debatable.
You pin it to your wall anyway. Next to it, a drawing you did of Nero's first stage shoes, absurd platform things with gold stitching and pebbles stuck to the soles. He refused to wear them again after tripping into a harpist. That was a good day. You've started sleeping with your window open. Not for the air, but for the sounds, occasional footsteps, muffled strings, a laugh tumbling down a nearby stairwell. All of it part of the great lullaby. Once years ago you thought your legacy would be a marble bust or a line in a scandalous biography, but this is better.
'Cause voices carry.
And while names may fade, a perfectly sustained note now that can echo forever. One evening just before twilight, Calvus asks what you want done with your writing when you're gone. Burn it, you say. He raises an eyebrow.
I'm serious. If they can't carry the notes in their heads, they don't deserve the rest.
He shakes his head, so dramatic.
Where do you think I learned it?
You sit in silence for a while after that. Then you say, bury my tuning fork under a fig tree. That'll confuse someone in 100 years. He nods, done. And so your days grow slower, not duller, just quieter, less urgent, more musical. Some mornings you wake to your own humming.
Other mornings you wake to silence and think that's music too.
And now as the stars stretch across the sky and your breath begins to slow, you can feel it, that soft hush of the world folding in for the night. The city is distant now, just a murmur behind your thoughts. You imagine the marble streets emptying one lamp at a time, flickering out as if sleep itself were walking the avenues, dimming the day by hand. You're back in that cool stone corridor, your sandals echoing faintly as you pass doorways where voices once rose and fell like waves. Somewhere the distant pluck of a lyre, the tap of a heel against mosaic, the hush before a curtain rises. Breathe in easy, breathe out. No need to remember it all now. The names, the sounds, the arguments about phrasing. Let them drift like parchment caught in a breeze. Let the candle in your memory gutter gently low. Your hand finds the blanket. You tuck it tighter. You don't need to move again tonight. Somewhere someone is still singing your scales. Somewhere a nervous singer remembers your advice and steadies their breath.
And you
rest. You did your part. You tuned the tyrant. You taught the echoes how to behave. Now let the silence have its solo.
You've earned it. Sleep well, singer.